Scott Dochterman. Chad Leistikow. Together on one pod, talking odds and all things Big Ten. Powered by GameDay Men's Health, with locations in Ankeny, West Des Moines, and North Liberty. From the Channel Seed Studios, this is Legends and Listeners. Exclusively on Iowa Everywhere.
Hey, Hawkeye fans, Big Ten fans, and Iowans everywhere. This is Chad Leistikow of the Des Moines Register, along with Scott Dochterman. If you're joining us for the first time, our show is called Legends and Listeners, and this is our 77th episode, I do believe, Scott. Definitely the first episode I've done from Seattle, Washington. As you can see, it's still a little bit dark outside as we record this morning. We've had trouble with my lighting, so please forgive the if I go dark here for moments on end here, Scott. But you look great back in Iowa. And,
thanks. Well, you're in Seattle, and it's dark in Seattle. I have a whole collection of Seattle music, and it really it comes to light.
I need some light right now. But it is it's a great city. I'd never been here before until the Sweet 16 2 years ago when the Iowa Women came up here 22 months ago. In fact, I was scrolling through my videos from that, and just it was such a different time. Like after Iowa goes to the Final Four, Caitlin Clark had like nobody around her. It's like me and like one other person like in the locker room, and it's just so crazy how much has changed. But anyway, love this place. I was here for the Iowa women's games against Oregon on Sunday, and now obviously the Hawkeye women finally break a 5-game losing streak, Scott. And I guess we can start there, unless you want to go men. But men could get a little dark.
Yeah.
What do you feel? What are you feeling this morning?
Well, first of all, Chad, it's good to see you. I hope Seattle's treating you well. When I went there last, it was the men's tournament back in 15 when
Gonzaga, Davidson first, right?
Yeah, they beat Davidson in the biggest 7-10 whitewashing we've ever seen, and then they got mopped by Gonzaga, but Gonzaga was really good, and I had some limitations that year. But it's I'm glad you're out there. I'm glad you had that trip. I hope it went well for you. And I guess let's start with the women. I mean, let's it's dark where you're at. Let's be bright first, and then we'll flip it, as we go along here. And I just wanted to ask you though, how did this trip come about? Because people don't travel very often for the women's basketball teams, let alone a flight. We've never, nobody's ever really done. Let's fly to Penn State for women's basketball, or Maryland usually, maybe if they're really good or something. But how did this one come about, and what's been your experience over these two games?
Yeah, so like last year was probably the first time that our boss, Carol Hunter, said, "Hey, like the women's team is driving a lot of traffic right now." Obviously it was. And we traveled to every game last year except one. I think we missed one game. Might've been Rutgers, I think. So between myself and Dargan Southern. And so we've kind of continued that this year. The interest in Iowa women is really high. We aren't going to every game this year, but this was one of those trips where, number one, I knew I liked it up here. My family and I had been up here last summer too, just for a family vacation. And then number two, it was like, well, we could knock out 2 trips or 2 games with one flight, and they were cool with it. And I took a few days off in between games, so that was kind of part of the deal too. Like, hey, if I'm going to go out there, would like to kind of chill a little bit. My wife came with me, and so it was a great experience. She's back now in Iowa working, but I hung back for last night's game, and it was great to be here. Honestly, like it was, obviously the Iowa only Iowa media person that came, but we saw the tale of two, themes of this team. Number one, the inexplicable losses. They lost for the 5th straight time. We're in danger of losing 6 straight for the first time since January of '99, which was the Angie Lee era. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jan was an assistant to Drake back then. And so was Lisa Wood was there too. And then they kind of right the ship. They looked like their old selves again last night, Scott, in an 85-61 win at Washington. It was a really, getting to stand outside the locker room after the win was it was like one of those Iowa football locker rooms, Scott, when they win a rivalry game. I mean, they really had a breath of fresh air, really excited, like smiling, yelling, shouting, celebrating. They knew they had a red-eye flight ahead, and they earned it. They finally kind of played like that, how they can play. And I feel like if you watched that game last night as an Iowa fan, I have to feel like you probably got some good feelings back that you've been missing for quite a while. Hawks hadn't won since January 1st.
Yeah, it looked like to me that there was a lot of like the frustration of several games that were just within a basket, a possession, a turnover here, a turnover there. It looked like that had kind of all dissipated, and they got their frustration out against Washington. I mean, they hit their first 9 3-pointers or something, felt like that. Lucy Olsen, who was, it looked to me like over the few weeks where she got into a slump, which happens, but then you could see that she put a lot of pressure on herself. And so then it was making it worse. And then everybody around her, it seemed to struggle because everybody's trying to figure out their role. The last year's role players are trying to step into newer, more important roles. And then the freshmen are really battling, to compete and to play. And then you have the holdovers who are kind of the upper echelon. Hannah Stolke wasn't able to make it, Sydney Falter and Lucy, it didn't look like there was a lot of on-court chemistry that was working. And then when you lose, that really seems to, throw gas on that fire. And there was a lot of turmoil, I think, among some of the fans anyway. But it looked like they got a ton of that frustration out. They played really well. They executed well on offense. They played decent defense, the whole game. And it looked like to me, it was like, okay, here's a loud exhale. Yes, you're back. Kind of that feel from the team. Who knows that that they have certainly a winnable game coming up against Northwestern at home, and then they got a juggernaut in USC coming in on Caitlin Clark Day. But it looked like for at least one game, it got everything out of the way, because I'm sure that Oregon game had to be as frustrating as Nebraska was. I think that one probably might have been worse because they had the big lead early and they had opportunities and just couldn't close it out. And their offense wasn't very good.
Yeah, I just want to remind folks, we are coming to you live from the Channel Seed Studios. Like I said, not quite live. I think we're putting this out maybe in an hour or something. But Channel Seed Studios, presented by GameDay Men's Health. Chad Leistikow, Scott Dochterman, legends and listeners. Let's stick with Lucy Olsen for a second, because she was a big theme of my coverage here. A tale of two games for Lucy. And there had been a lot of chatter, I guess, Scott, understandably so. It's like, wow, it's starting to look like this transfer was not, not going to work out. Definitely, she was on the bench at the end of the Oregon game. She was on the bench at the end of Indiana, right? So she did not. Two of the last three games, she was not in the game when the game was on the line. And the other game that she was in, she was 1 for 6 from the foul line in the fourth quarter against Nebraska. Right. Nebraska, a ton of credit. They hit 10 straight shots in that game last Thursday, but it was jarring to see how bad she played in the second half. She was 0 for 7 with 4 turnovers and no assists against Oregon in the second half. And then last night, she's 8 for 8 from the field, 20 points, 6 assists, played basically a perfect game. It was I got to talk to her afterwards. I talked to Taylor McCabe afterwards, who's one of her best friends on the team. And, Taylor just said she's, just kept coming back, kept working. And Jensen, went through this after the game Sunday with me in the locker room. And then again last night, we talked so much about Lucy, both on and off the record. And it was just like, she was so tight herself that it made everyone else tight. I mean, just think back to the Caitlin Clark game against K-State last year when she was 9 for 32. But Lucy had 5 straight of those types of games. You know what I mean? For the most part, not exactly, but when your star is not your supposed star, I guess, is not clicking, then everyone else feels like, oh God, what? And now if I miss, it's going to get worse. And if I miss, that's just going, we're going to lose this lead again. You can understand how it all happens. And it's been interesting what to make of this, losing streak. And now getting out of it does feel like to me they got exactly what they needed last night. Lucy back on track, and the team got a big win. The offense looked good. Right.
Because, my novice point of view, I guess, from watching it and not being there yesterday, but being there for several of these games and viewing it is, take it from the top. You lose the greatest player in college basketball history in Caitlin Clark. I'm calling it what it is. I don't care what anybody else thinks. Kate Martin, the ultimate glue piece, the quarterback, the toughest kid that probably ever played Iowa women's basketball. And then you got a 3-and-D and Gabby Marshall, and you got Molly Davis, who set everybody up. You lose those four pieces. Somebody has to fill that vacuum. Scoring vacuum, leadership vacuum, chemistry. It appeared to me going into this season that there were three pieces that you felt like Iowa should count on to fill that void, not to their level, but to fill it and then allow everybody else's roles to grow, freshmen to improve, get experience, and kind of elevate themselves to where by February they're in a good position. And that would have been Sydney Falter, Hannah Stolke, and then your new piece, Lucy Olsen, third leading scorer in the nation. Well, as we've seen, they've had nothing but disruption since the summer, with Hannah Stolke having a surgery, and Sydney Falter having a surgery, and Lucy being inconsistent is probably a fair way to describe how she's played this year. And you could tell that it weighed on her, and you're right. It's obvious that it weighed on her teammates, because when they're looking for leadership, because there's no leadership there. By the way, the light is really improving as the sun's coming up in the background. But as the leadership, as there's a lack of consistency from your leadership, that everybody's looking for somebody to kind of guide them. And Aaliyah Guyton has kind of been that voice, but then, to get a freshman to do that, and it's not Caitlin Clark, is very difficult on a team when you have some veterans, and you can see the potential for rifts. Well, when Lucy plays the way she did, and if Hannah Stolke can come back and play well when she's returns to the lineup, and Sydney Falter, I think her performances have been pure Sid. Let's go out and get 12 rebounds and score 8 points or whatever. If you could do that and then everybody else elevate their game around them, then they're in a good position. But during the losing streak with Lucy Olsen's inconsistency, you could see that it was just, everybody was tense, everybody was anxious, and that really spilled over to the floor. And the unfortunate part is, Chad, as you know, then Jensen, who's a new coach in her own right and is making mistakes on her own, which is totally rational, looks for answers. And the way you look for answers is, well, if you're 0 for 7 from the floor, or you're 1 for 6 from the free throw line, and we go to overtime and lose, I need somebody in there who can at least convert. So then you start bringing other people in, and then you're playing this guessing game, and that can get awfully difficult. So all that being said, I see a path. If Lucy could, last night I called her Lucy, because she played loose. She looked loose. She looked like she was having fun again. And she's always had that fun efficacy, smile on her face and just a real joy to be around. If she can get back on track there, then I think this team will be much better for it.
Let's talk about Jensen for a second here, because there's it just gets so ugly. Like it's like as bad as Iowa football Twitters can be. Sometimes it has gotten to ugly levels. Would you say that, Scott?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I almost said I didn't, but I was just thinking to myself. I was thinking like Iowa fan Twitter number, Number one, Iowa women, ... to football. Like, so irrational what's going on. And I think it's part of like the there, there's kind of getting used to this, experiencing success so much. Maybe it's like I don't know, like a Clemson football, like, they go through a rebuilding year and like everyone's ready to torch Dabo Sweeney's house or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like there's not much perspective at all. I don't see out there at all. Like, and so I think that Jensen has done a really good job keeping this team together. You could see how connected they were. She has been reminding them repeatedly, like, this is all going to end sometime and we're going to break through, but and she's been there before. That's what people like saying, well, new coach, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's been through highs and lows. She's been a coach for 30 plus years with Lisa Bluter. She's been in high level games. She's been in rebuilding years. She's been, with a new staff before. I mean, this is not new to her. And I think people forget that adversity, it comes in basketball. It really, I mean, we've seen it in the men's team all the time. Like, they go through a losing streak every year. And even the good teams go through losing streaks. But anyway, I feel like she has gotten way too much criticism, in my opinion, for what has been basically the team, inside its own head. I mean, think about what was it, which team was it that lost, the men's team that lost? I guess there were several, but just kind of got in its own head late. They were good for a while, and then got maybe Utah senior year.
Yeah, 16 team.
Yeah. And maybe they, so this women's team, they beat a lot of teams that were good last year that aren't good this year. And I think a lot of people got a little bit carried away with the unbeaten start and all this stuff, but they really didn't have any quality wins. And I think it just kind of caught up with them a little bit. If you take off the greatest player college basketball has ever seen, probably the greatest player of ultimately, potentially, that women's basketball has ever seen. We'll see how that plays out. But and then you also put in a new coach, 6 new players. You have to expect that there's going to be some adversity. And so from what I've seen, kind of behind the scenes and, just watching as well, like, I feel like that the Jensen is this is all going to pay off for both theirs and junior women's basketball program. Because remember, they're in contention for a lot of high level recruits right now, and it's your choice if you want to be a jerk on Twitter and make Iowa fans look bad out there, and you don't get these players. That's your decision. But I feel like that she's got this thing in the right spot, and I'm not going to be a Jensen apologist forever. We'll call it like we see it, but in this case, I'm seeing a coach that knows what she's doing, is doing everything she can to help them out of the rut, and they got out of it last night. And she's put a lot of pressure on herself. Just like she kind of admitted that with me, that she has put a lot on her own shoulders, and I think she needs to also give herself a little bit of room to fail. And so anyway, that's kind of my little rant on that. People are being a little bit overblown on Jensen right now.
Sure, I agree with that. I think she's made a few mistakes. I'm sure she would look at, and maybe she doesn't want to admit it, and maybe she will after the season or whatever, and that's fine. But I think a lot of that is execution based by her players. What was it, the Nebraska game where you get it? Your guard gets to the hole, you have a good look, you win the game, and then it doesn't happen, and then you go to overtime. I mean, that's a winning play. Oregon, there are winning plays to be made, and at the free throw line, she can't shoot free throws for them. When you have an open look at the basket and on a layup at the buzzer and you don't make it, that's not on her. She called the right play. The right play didn't work. Again, the adversity strikes, and people, that just seem to really latch on to the Caitlin Clark era and don't remember or hardly anything other than the name Megan Gustafson and not the way she played before the Caitlin Clark era. People don't understand what this program has been through and what it's done. And it wasn't until Megan really that they broke through to get to the Sweet 16 and Elite Eight and all of that. So I think this program is historically full of kind of ups and downs a little bit. And it's going to happen when you fill that vacuum of the greatest player of all time, probably the greatest leader in women's basketball history, Kate Martin, and you try to play, you have a new coach who's trying to feel all these people out. You have a very talented freshman class that's obviously pushing really hard to get on the floor and playing well, and you're going to have cliques that develop over that. That's all going to manifest itself out there. But I don't want to always call out Iowa fandom because that kind of gets old and loathsome at times. But in this case, there's a certain joy that some fans have with complaining about things. They want things to be bad so they can really latch onto it and complain in social media settings. And I wrote about this week about Mark Gronowski, that, he in the portal, there is a case to be made he was the best portal quarterback. Now, most people probably rate him, I don't care what 24 blanket 7 has. It's like, he's the 29th best quarterback in there. Cade was 25th. In my eyes, which I care about, I don't care what anybody else thinks, he's a top 5 quarterback in the portal this year. You put him and you put Carson Beck and you put Miller Moss, whatever. I think he's in that category. And I wrote about, hey, guys, relax. Okay, he had a shoulder situation. It's getting taken care of. It's not Cade McNamara. Be happy for once in your life that your team went out and spent a ton of money to get this guy. And it's more than everybody thought. And they went out and they, just exactly like I've said on here, Chad, go out, get your guy. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what you got to do. Go out and get your guy. They did. They needed a quarterback. We haven't seen a good quarterback in a long time. They went out and got one. And yet, when I write to this column, I've got people going, I'm bookmarking this. Like they can't wait for him to fail so they can throw it back in my face. And it's the same way with Jan Jensen. I had a column that I wrote that she's the only choice that they really should have made back in May. And I've got people retweeting my own column back to me saying, is she really? And I'm thinking, are you taking pleasure in this?
Right.
What is your deal? Are you the type of person that opens Christmas presents and say, I didn't want this. I don't know why you got it for me. I mean, what kind of way is that to live through life? If you're rooting for a team and you want them to fail so you can complain, you're not the person I want to be around. I don't care if it's social media. And people who do that, by the way, I'm going to give you all a little bit of a Scott thought here is, if you start throwing stuff at me back in my face, you forfeit the right for me to communicate with you, and I will mute you. That's the way I feel. That if you're going to bring up a column I wrote in May because they got a losing streak, and you think the coach is bad, and you immediately tweet it at me and say, "Oh, is she really the right choice?" You know what? I'm not going to deal with you. We could have a conversation, sure, but anyway. I'm on a little bit of a rant, Chad, on this, but I do think it's kind of on the same lines of people coming after Jan, coming after the players, yelling. It's like you deal with this in men's basketball all the time. Football, a bad quarter, let alone a loss, and then it just is a bonfire that doesn't, it's raging. Everybody wants to complain, and it's like, you know what? Maybe you might want to redouble your efforts and say, you know what? They're struggling. I'm still a fan, but that's just not the psyche right now. They ride the pendulum so hard that if they win a couple of games, it's like, we need to be ranked. And then if they lose a couple of games, it's like, fire everybody and including Beth Getz for making this higher. It's like, just relax.
Yeah, good stuff there, Scott. Just want to finish up the women's conversation by looking ahead. Number one, Hannah Stuelke. I wrote her mom was up here. Her mom was up here in Seattle. She made the trip anyway. It was great. I got to talk to Joanna. And she kind of gave me a little update on how Hannah's doing. It does sound like a pretty bad concussion. You'll like this, Scott. She said when you rewatch the video, it looks like it was a combination of a face mask and horse collar all at once is what happened. So a Nebraska player like reaches around her and kind of almost cranks her head. Like it was unintentional. It wasn't like she did it maliciously. She was going for rebound and trying to pull it in around Hannah's face. And basically Hannah got whiplash. And so, it's going through protocol. Sounds like Jensen said it was a pretty bad one. So that's kind of the latest there, but it was cool that her mom was still there. They're hopeful she can play Tuesday against Northwestern, but with concussions, as it's just, you never know when it's going to kind of subside. You have to pass protocol. They have all that stuff going on.
I hope she shows up for practice though.
Oh, now look who's bringing up old stuff now. Oh boy. Anyway, zing. I don't know where to go from that. No, I was just to look at Iowa women's schedule here coming up. Obviously, Northwestern, one of the worst teams in the Big Ten, coming up on Tuesday at 7:00, and then it gets harder. So Iowa would get Iowa to 4-6 in the Big Ten, assuming they can win that game with or without Hannah. They probably should. And then they were considered among the last four in going into yesterday's game against Washington, which was also among the last four in, according to Charlie Cream. Now, I know it's early, but throughout all these losses, Iowa's net was still 37. So, and there's talk that there could be 10 plus teams from the Big Ten getting into the tournament. So they're far from done in terms of the NCAA tournament. But they do need to win some of these games. So after Northwestern, it's home against USC, 5th-ranked team in the country. Let's be honest, that's going to be really tough. I mean, I'm not sure who guards Juju Watkins. Probably Kylie, I guess. But and then you're at Minnesota, tough game. At Nebraska, we've seen how tough they are. Home against Rutgers is your only probably gimme. Then you're at Ohio State, home against UCLA, at Michigan. So, they're going to have to win some of these games, Scott. I mean, I don't think you can get in the tournament by going 6-12 in the Big Ten. Maybe you can, but they're going to have to probably steal one of these games, but it's also opportunity. So I'm not putting it past this Iowa team at home to beat anybody. And especially on Caitlin Clark Day, maybe they get some magic brewed up that day and the fans are great. I'm sure it's going to be incredible in there. That's what they need. They need to take care of business and maybe get one of these other big ones and get in the tournament, maybe as a 10 or a 7 or 8. You don't want to be an 8 too much, but maybe that's kind of what I see. I think it's going to be. I think they have a good shot to get in, but it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, you look at that stretch there, and what do you think? I mean, if they go 7-11 in the Big Ten this year, they're probably on the right side of the bubble if they can win a Big Ten tournament game, because they did have a nice preseason. I mean, they lost to Tennessee, but I mean, they beat Iowa State. They beat Drake and UNI. They're not bad. I mean, they've had some nice wins, and then they got to get somebody. I think not Northwestern and Rutgers, but get a USC. Somebody they've got to beat a couple of teams that are probably tournament, not only tournament worthy but host worthy, Michigan or something like that. And so, is it possible? Sure. Iowa's gone on the road and lost games to teams that are good, or played close to teams that are good when they had Caitlin Clark. So I don't see any reason why they can't. Whether it's beat Minnesota on the road or beat Nebraska on the road. I think they're more than capable of doing something like that, but they got to do it too, and they got to continue how they played last night. But and then I guess you look over at the men, and they could use some testosterone, I think.
Good segue there. Yeah, I just checked, and Iowa women are up to 33 in the net after last night's quad 1 win against Washington. We will wrap up the women's conversation there, but. Want to give a shout out to obviously GameDay Men's Health, just a tremendous sponsor, tremendous supporter of Legends and listeners. And I know a lot of you out there have benefited from everything Game Day Men's Health can do for you, whether that's testosterone replacement therapy or by helping you lose weight. Kind of recalibrate your body to what you need. Very, very safe, very natural, very effective. Increasing your testosterone, for starters, it can help your mood, your sex drive, your athleticism. Well, maybe not athleticism, but your athletic endurance. Just overall your health. I feel like it's helped my metabolism, honestly. Like I feel like I've, kept weight off, continuing to exercise constantly, but Game Day Men's Health just is all over it. They just rechecked my levels recently, doing great, actually kind of exceeding with like no side effects. I know everyone's different, but it's just been a tremendous experience for myself. I know it's been good for you too, Scott. So if you're out there, you're on the fence, it's a new year. They're really gearing up for weight loss right now. Feel free to check them out with a no obligation free private visit at GameDayMen'sHealth.com or visit one of their spots, Ankeny, West Des Moines, or North Liberty here in Iowa, Scott.
Exactly. It's been great for me. I lost enough weight to where, I've had to shelve some clothes and moving on to some other clothes that I've had for a while. And now I'm going, I don't know, maybe I need to go out and get some more, so that's a great byproduct of what Game Day Men's Health has done for me personally and will continue to do for me. And, even though we got hit with a snowstorm last night yesterday and last night in eastern Iowa, about 4 to 5 inches, but had plenty of energy to go out and scoop and shovel and use the snow blower this morning and then here to get rowdy with Chad on Legends and Listening. So.
Well, let's peel off the Band-Aid here, Scott. Let's talk some men's basketball. I did not see any of the Minnesota game. I have caught up on all the coverage. I know you were there, and that really tough look to come back after that West Coast trip and then lose to one of the worst teams in the Big Ten at home, with like no fans there and 3 for 21 from three. I really like the players on this team, but it's just not happening right now for Fran McCaffrey. And certainly, I would say you've covered this men's basketball team, Scott, longer than I have. You basically have been covering Fran since the beginning. Mm-hmm. I got on the beat in Aaron White's senior year was my first year back on the Hawkeye beat. So most of the McCaffrey era, but not all. Can you remember a time when you felt like it was this dire, in terms of what the future might hold for this program and this head coach? No,
this is the most bleak it's been, and you just kind of know when you know. It's hard to put your finger on it, but when everything is kind of tipped in the other direction. And I remember it well with Licklider. Actually, it was your former colleague Rick Brown and I were at the Minnesota game, the final regular season game in year 3 for Licklider. And at the end of it, they lost 88-53 into Minnesota up there. And it was so bad that, they have that chant, "Who hates Iowa? We hate Iowa" chant. And they stopped doing it. It was so bad. And it was like, and I remember turning to Rick afterwards, and I just said, they just can't do this anymore. You cannot do this. And the other day, Chad, I think that told us everything about the program. As you mentioned the figures. I mean, that was Minnesota's second win in Big Ten play. They beat Michigan at home. That's one thing. They hadn't beaten Iowa in Carver in 10 years. They're not a good team. They may have a coaching change for themselves coming up. But Iowa looked flat, and the atmosphere was way, way, way worse than I've ever experienced for a Big Ten game. Throw COVID out of it, that doesn't count. But they listed it at 8,000. My guess is around 5. And I know, cold night, and I had a couple people say, well, it was bad weather, 8:00 game. Okay, I understand, but I don't care. And I think the apathy is so embedded right now with Iowa men's basketball that there's going to have to be a change made. And I don't say that lightly. I'm not one of these people that, certainly whether it's Kirk or Fran or whatever, I think Fran's an excellent coach. I think he knows how to play out. He knows how to compete and win games. Since 2012, Iowa has been, Iowa and Michigan State are the only two programs to have only one losing season in Big Ten play. That's remarkable. And the fact that Iowa's been competitive in the Big Ten and in getting into the NCAA tournament most years has been a really good run. But you can't ignore the signs that you see. And that is, there's a couple of points, just like with Licklighters last year. You see it now matriculating with Iowa. Wisconsin game, giving up 116 points, 21 three-pointers, a Big Ten record, the most points Wisconsin had ever scored against a Big Ten opponent, second most in its history. And you get flatline like that. Okay, how do you recalibrate yourself? How do you put yourself in a position to compete beyond that? All right, well, they won a couple of games. They beat Indiana decisively at home. What do you do then? You're going on a West Coast trip, USC, UCLA. USC game to me is a microcosm. They were blown out early. They fought their way back because they got great offense, and they couldn't generate a stop down the stretch to get the win. And then UCLA, flat. You're down 30 points in the first half. It was a struggle for me, and I'm sure for everybody else. But, I'm invested in it because we talk about this, and sometimes I write about this, and I know you write about it. That's the only reason why I was watching it. I had no interest in watching it. And then the other day, I was kind of doing some other basketball work, but keeping my eye on this game, 3 of 21, but the atmosphere could not have been more flat. And again, the students are back. It's an 8:00 start, weather, it was really cold, but cold is different than snow and ice. And to see a listed crowd of 8,000, which there are 3,000 no-shows out of that, to see really no atmosphere, see the team kind of come back late, but never really pull it out against a bad team. The writing's on the wall. That's all I can really say right now. You can see where this is going. It's just a matter of how it gets done.
A lot to unpack there. Obviously, no question. There's a feel. It's not really that much different. The basketball isn't like that much different. They've always been kind of like pretty good. They got a high ceiling at times, but also, can go through some spells and be a bubble team-ish.
Mm-hmm.
One of the best offensive coaches we've seen come through the Big Ten for sure. It's amazing how he gets to play his guys to play, under-recruited guys to play with so much confidence and that they can compete. And he's never cheated. He's not been one of these guys that, has had, a high-ticket roster and kind of done a little bit out of what he's had. Think about like a Jordan Bohannon.
Mm-hmm.
Garza, you got to give him a ton of credit for what he did with Luka and developing him. And obviously, he saw something with the Murrays that nobody else did. And look at what they did for this program, and on and on and on. You can find guys that have overachieved. Even to an extent, getting a guy like Peyton Sanford or Josh Dix even recently, they're Iowa high school players who have been really good in the Big Ten. And so you got to give him some credit there. I think that there still is a very, very small opening for this team to go on a surge because I think they have good players. But at the same, so I don't want to completely write off this team, but what you say about just sort of there's no question that the interest in this program is very, very low right now. And even if they win on, let's say they go win 5 out of 6, I would guess it's not going to uptick a ton. Like the lack of March success for sure has just sort of made folks be like, well, I'll believe it when I see it type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to pull the football out for me again. I'm not going to get excited. I'm not going to get invested because this has hurt me before. And so it's a tough position for Fran McCaffrey to be in. It's just kind of what happens in coaching. Like you stay at one place a long time, this can happen. And, I wrote about this in the in my Beth Getz interview. His buyout would be $4.2 million as of April 1st. If Iowa wanted to get out of it. That is not a ton of money in today's world. And you can pay it over the course of 3 years. I read the contract. So you're talking a little over $1 million a year over the next 3 years if you wanted to even pay the full buyout. Or you could do a negotiated buyout. There's some options here. Obviously, I think Beth Getz, it's too early to do that. Again, you don't want a Tom Davis situation where your team makes the Sweet 16 and you've announced that he's not coming back, stuff like that. Because this team, I'm just saying, this team could. I'm just saying they've got the pieces this year. They could do something like that, and that would be insane. I just don't see it happening, but that's kind of where we are. It just feels like it's going down this path, and it's probably going to go down this path because I can't imagine if this continues, like especially if they don't make the tournament. I just can't imagine a scenario in which something doesn't happen. And that's not really a slight on Fran. It's just the way it is. That's what's unfortunate about this. Yeah.
You bring up a lot of good points about Fran, and there are a lot of really, outstanding things that he's done, no question. And, he is the all-time leader in wins. You don't want to just toss him aside and ignore that. That's an important part of the fabric of Iowa basketball, and he's got a lot of really good points. I think right now what you have to look at is, competitiveness on the floor is important, of course, and they've been competitive. I mean, last year they were a game or two away from probably being in the NCAA tournament, maybe one more win in the regular season. They may have gotten there. They've played in it. But as we know, high level sports, it's more than just wins and losses. It's how does your fan base respond to these games and these outcomes and the people who are in there. And I think with Fran, the verdict is in. The fans are just not there anymore. They're not buying in. They don't care. They don't talk about it. When we're out, out and about around town or whatever, and people stop you or stop me. I know in my case, people will ask me about the women's games. I was getting my haircut last week, and I'm like, and I just kind of sit off the side. I don't say anything. And then there was this old guy talking to the woman cutting his hair, and all they were talking about were the women's game, and then how the disappointment of losing to Nebraska and all of that type of scenario. And I think that's really important, that that this time of year people care about women's basketball, but they just don't have that interest in the men. And, then you bring up, is this fair or unfair? Well, what has Fran done to cultivate the fan base, to bring them back in, to make them feel excited, to make them want to be part of the program that they need to be a part of? There really isn't anything. And maybe this is where you could say I'm being unfair, but when you look at the totality of what has happened under his tenure off the floor, when it comes to connecting men's basketball with the fan base, it's been more pulled apart than put together. When you have the PTL was very successful, and I understand that the circumstances changed and you wanted it, and that was necessary to pull the plug on it, but it was such an important fixture in summer basketball for Iowa fans to be able to go twice a week for about a 4 to 6 week period and watch games. 400 or 500 people would go there. For people like us, we would write about them, take videos of them, talk about them on podcasts and on TV, and you'd see highlights. But what it did was it connected the fans with the product. They could see them, they could read about them, they could learn about them, they could see videos of them. And so therefore there was a connection. That connection is gone. Well, what do you replace it with? Crickets. Nothing. There's no, they should do a barnstorming tour or something like that. Hey, we're going to, this Tuesday night, we're going to be in Des Moines or West Des Moines Valley High School, and we're going to do an NIL. We're going to do not a clinic, but just an NIL bonanza, and we're going to have a workout, and we're going to sign autographs, and yay, go Hawks, that type of thing. then you had, shirts and skins, Chad, which I know, when you were at the Gazette a million years ago and stuff, that always took place before football games at Carver, like 8:30 in the morning. A couple thousand fans would filter into Carver and they walk around and they watch the teams compete. They had the black and gold blowout. Nothing like that anymore. No shirts and skins. You had the in-state series, home and away. That got cut, down first from only to play one of Drake and you and I, and then to eliminate it altogether. And so all those things that had people interested talking Iowa basketball. And then you take 3 games and you play them at neutral sites. Who's your big opponent that you're playing at home? For the last 2 years, it's been Iowa State this year, and that's it. A non-conference, because the ACC Big Ten Challenge is gone. Well, who'd you replace that with? Well, we're going to go to Sioux Falls. We're going to go to the Quad Cities. We're going to go to Kansas City. Your tournament, your home tournament. What was that? Games, nothing. What are you trying to do with this program other than just say, we've got a basketball, come support us? That's it. That's why fans are saying, well, I'll do all that. I'll accept all that if you win Big Ten tournaments or go to the NCAA tournament. But if you're not doing that and you're not invested in me as a fan, it's easy for me to turn my back. And that's the worst possible thing that can happen to Iowa, because Iowa fans are now like, I've learned I can live without it. I don't care. And apathy is the opposite of love, not hate. So I think they're in a dangerous spot, and you cannot continue this. And I understand the Tom Davis situation wholeheartedly. I lived through it. I worked through it. And there are 2 sides of it. Yes, you do not want a lame duck season. That's horrible. However, it's not the same when it comes to product on the floor, because you need to energize your team. And if that means you take a dip in the Big Ten for a couple of years to gather it all up and gather some NIL steam and put quality product on the floor, fine. You just can't have what you're having now, because what's going to happen next year? Because if I'm looking at Owen Freeman and Josh Dix, would you come back to Iowa next year under this situation? Might not anyway, but I think I'd be shopping around even if Fran came back.
Last thought there is, Beth Getz in our interview, and forgive me if we talked about this before, but she's in the process of trying to fundraise for Carver Hawkeye Arena. And so if you don't have a program that you're going to get excited about on the men's side, that's going to be really difficult to get people to buy in and say, hey, here's $5 million. Like, I'm excited, It's a tough ask, but, I think that's going to have to be part of her assessment as well. I know it will be. It's a tough spot, but I have confidence that this will get this will be done in a good way. I feel like I'm not saying it's over, but it just seems like it's trending that way. All right, so let's move on to football, Scott. I got a flight to catch here, so we got to move on. But before we do, I just want to trumpet the Iowa Wild big game this weekend against the Texas Stars. Saturday, it's country night featuring a post-game concert by Dylan Scott. We already did our ticket giveaway, but we do want to encourage you to grab some seats. Head to iowawild.com. VIP packs are still available, so you can watch the concert from the ice. That's pretty crazy to think about. There's 2-for-1 Confluence beers on Saturday night, so a lot of reasons to go check out some high-level hockey. I mean, one step below the NHL, Scott, in downtown Des Moines at Wells Fargo Arena. I don't think they've changed it to the Casey Center yet, have they? That still says Wells Fargo, right? So, yeah.
I don't know.
National championship game? Let's finish with that. The Big Ten on top for the second straight year. Your thoughts?
Well, I guess first of all, you look at the tournament itself. I really liked it. I thought it was a quality tournament. I thought that Ohio State was the most talented team in the country, and it played like it the last 4 weeks. And when I was analyzing Notre Dame, even when they played Indiana, but then throughout the tournament, and then going against Ohio State, I thought of Notre Dame as kind of to take it local, a polished version of Iowa like 2021, because they'd scored like 115 more points off turnovers than their opponents did. They led the country in turnovers and had 21 interceptions or something like that. And so I'm like, that's the way that they have to win, that they have to run the ball, which they did. That first drive was incredible against Ohio State. They've got to turn over Ohio State, and they got to frustrate Ohio State. So basically you've got to say, we got to Iowa, Ohio State. But the problem is, and it's kind of like the old mantra when, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. Well, what happens when talent works hard? Well, they beat you. And that's kind of what happened here with this. The Big Ten now is the preeminent conference in college football. That can change next year. But when you see the way, last year you had the two teams, Michigan and Washington. Now Washington's a Big Ten member. This year you had 4 Big Ten teams qualify, and 3 ended up in the top 5. Oregon ended up 3rd, and next year there's several teams that can end up in the dance. I think right now I see Illinois as being very much a contender. And part of it is all the pieces that they brought back from a 10-win team. But also you look at the back half of their schedule, really outside of playing Indiana early, which I think could be a coin flip, and Ohio State at home, they've got a schedule that can help them run the race. And so this Big Ten is a juggernaut, henceforth. The one question is, I'll kick it to you, is what's it going to take for Iowa to not only get to the tournament, but to compete in the tournament? And as Iowa had a team recently under Kirk Ferentz, historically, if you want to go that far, that's capable of, okay, if there was a 12-team tournament in 09 or 02 or 15 or 21, even if they would have made it and won a game or two extra, I mean, could this team have gotten there? And could they have competed? B,
hey, brought it back to Iowa here. Good job. I think the key for Iowa if you want to compete in a playoff, like actually maybe win a playoff game, is it's just going to come down to the line of scrimmage. I mean, we saw that with this whole playoff. Like, if you can control the line of scrimmage, that's what Notre Dame made it to the finals. I mean, they had a good interior trench play. You got to have that. I think Iowa is fully capable of that. I think they're on. They've rebuilt that offensive line quite a bit. It's crazy. They've just how bad the quarterback play has been, and so you give them. You give him a Mark Gronowski type. We'll see how good he is, Scott. We're going to bring your column up every month next fall when he's 15 for 31. But no, I'm just joking. I think it's as long as you can play, compete up front and compete defensively, like, you're going to have a chance in these games. Especially if you're Iowa, if you can be good on special teams. I mean, just make your field goals, hit your punts, cover kicks. I mean, it's really, they're not far off in terms of competing. Now, which team maybe could have competed? You had Tristan Wirfs out there. You had AJ Epinesa. You had, decent senior quarterback in Stanley. You actually had receivers. You had Tyler Goodson kind of emerging that year. I'm always kind of partial to that team. Because I feel like that they went 10-3. You were with me up in Ann Arbor when they couldn't block anybody, and that was when Jackson had just come back from an injury, right? So they were just, it's one of those things where they probably needed to win one more if they would have been in the 12-team playoff. But I feel like that team could have competed because they had the trench play, they had decent quarterback play, the defense was pretty darn good that year. And obviously, the special teams wasn't bad either with a consensus All-American place kicker with Keith Duncan. Yeah. So I'm going to say 19, Scott. Might be a little controversial, but I think 19. I would have liked to have seen them in a playoff.
It's, I kind of measuring against, first of all, Ohio State is never an easy task. I don't care how good these teams were. The 02 team, you look at it first and you go, yes, it would have competed for the whole thing. What would it cost it? Probably its secondary play. I don't think it would have held up against it didn't against USC in the second half. So 09 had some of the horses, didn't have a lot of depth, didn't run the ball very well, and it did have some very close wins against some teams that shouldn't have had close wins with, like Arkansas State and UNI. Then 15, it might have won a game or two. If that would have been in place, they would have been the number 5 seed. They would have played probably Houston at home at Kinnick Stadium. They would have won that game. How would they have competed against Oklahoma? Maybe. But finally, among the recent ones, I would probably go more 8. No. Actually, I would go 20. I think in 2002,
20 had a good team.
Quarterback was the downfall.
Right, that's the thing.
They had, Laporta and Brandon Smith and Amir Smith-Marset, and they were good everywhere. And in watching the way that tournament played out, they could have finished second. Alabama would have beat them, no question. Alabama was fantastic that year with Devontae Smith and those teams. But they were better than Notre Dame. I thought that, if they would have went to Indianapolis and played Ohio State at the end of the year, I thought they would have been very competitive there. 18 with the tight ends would have been very competitive. Had some really close losses, but then they had holes too. So anyway, I think that's probably where I would go. Can Iowa get there, Chad? Yes. Line of scrimmage play matters. They ran the ball very, very well this year. If they had a passing game, but then you got to flip it over. The defense needed to be better. But it definitely has the potential as a program to get there once every 4 to 5 years, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what you got. I think this program can compete for that before or during and after the Kirk Ferentz era. I think that it's possible. It's possible. And anyway, I saw the over/under win total already is out for next year. Iowa 6.5, Scott. Iowa 6.5. So what do you make of that?
That's about right. They're losing a lot of pieces, and their schedule is increases difficulty significantly when you think about it. I mean, they're playing Oregon, Indiana, and Penn State all at home. They've got to travel to USC. They got to travel to Wisconsin and Nebraska, plus play. I mentioned Oregon coming to Iowa City, and then they got to go to the Big 12 runner-up, early in the season. So when you're playing those games, plus a Michigan State which beat them, and they got to go to Rutgers, which won 7 games. I think it's a very challenging season, but as we've seen in the past, they handle challenges pretty well. So I think a different leadership and on the team, I think it might be able to help this team out a little bit.
Yeah. Quarterback play. It's all about quarterback play for me this year for the Hawks, and they'll be fine on defense, but there'll be maybe some lumps there as well. So it's going to be a little bit different kind of season. Tough schedule, rebuilding defense a little bit, and maybe have a quarterback. We'll see. What can that do for you? Anyway, good show, Scott. I got a flight to catch, and I'll see you soon, buddy.
All right, flight safe.
All right, for Scott Dochterman, this is Chad Leistikow, Legends and Listeners, every Thursday from the Channel Seed Studios and only on Iowa Everywhere.